What 100% fact is the hardest to believe? If a billion people from both China and India didn't exist, they would still be the #1 and #2 most populated nations in the world. That only 6 people have survived rabies. Rabies has a 99% mortality rate. You can have rabies for an entire year without symptoms, and once you have symptoms, it's already late. You'll probably die in a couple of days if you have symptoms. More than a year, it can lay dormant for several years. You go on a camping trip and wake up, noting you have a scratch on your arm. You put a Band-Aid on and think no more about it. A couple of years later, you feel unwell. You're already dead. There's nothing to save you. Rabies is terrifying. I was bitten by a bat 5 years ago while doing yard work. It looked like a pin and was nearly gone by the time I made it to the hospital. I went because I remembered a post about rabies that I read on here. The doc was skeptical to give me the vaccine, but I told him if he was wrong, I was dead. He relented and I went through the protocol. It sucked. 7 shots in my hips and finger, where I was bitten that day, and then 2 follow-ups. 1 at 2 weeks and then 1 month later, both with more shots. Still better than suffering a painful death from a preventable accident. Go to your doctor now. If exposure to rabies is considered highly likely, post-exposure prophylaxis should be started as soon as possible after the exposure. If the initiation of post-exposure prophylaxis is delayed until test results from the involved animal are available, a maximum waiting period of 48 hours is recommended. In consultation with public health officials, post-exposure prophylaxis may be discontinued if the animal tests negative for rabies. Yeah, I think it's more because there's a chance, but have no idea on percentages, etc. 20 years ago, when we were backpacking around Costa Rica, my wife was bitten, nipped by a dog. Didn't think much of it until we were having breakfast at a cafe the next morning and got chatting with the owner who was heading to San Jose that day to have her. Dog put down because it had contracted rabies. Kind of startled us and we asked more questions. Turned out a number of the local dogs had contracted rabies. We called the embassy to find out where they get their healthcare and for advice. They recommended we travel to San Jose that day and visit a specific clinic and get the course started ASAP. We did that and continued on with our vacation. Once home, visited our GP and she continued the vaccine protocol. At the same time, rabies has been dropping dramatically in North/Central/South America and almost always comes from bats now. Asia and Africa is a different story. The 48 hours is because you can start showing symptoms as little as 48 hours after infection, at which point you are dead. It can also be as much as many years or never, but taking that bet is playing Russian roulette. The vaccine is effective up until the point where you start showing symptoms, so it's never really too late to start unless you are dying. Obviously super. Long dormancy periods are rare as well though. American Veterinary Medicine Association. In the United States, most cases of rabies occur in wild animals, mainly skunks, raccoons, bats, coyotes, and foxes. In recent years, cats have become the most common domestic animal infected with rabies. This is because many cat owners do not vaccinate their cats, and cats can be exposed to rabid wildlife, either outdoors or when bats get into the house. Rabies also occurs in dogs and cattle in significant numbers and, while not as common, has been diagnosed in horses, goats, sheep, swine, and ferrets. I wonder where their figures come from to state significant numbers. The CDC puts cases in dogs at around 60-70 per year, out of roughly 90 million pet dogs in the U.S. The institution of mandatory dog vaccination programs has halted the natural spread of rabies among domestic dogs, which are no longer considered a rabies reservoir in the United States. Nevertheless, around 60 to 70 dogs and more than 250 cats are reported rabid each year. Nearly all these animals were unvaccinated and acquired rabies from wildlife, such as bats, raccoons, and skunks. During 2018, domestic animals accounted for 47.2% of all animals submitted for testing, but only 9% and equals 362 of all rabies cases reported, representing a decrease of 9.3% compared with the number reported in 2017. 63 rabid dogs were reported in 2018, representing a 1.6% increase from the 62 reported in 2017. Most of the rabid dogs were reported from Texas, 15, Puerto Rico, 13, Georgia, 7, Pennsylvania, 5, Colorado, 4, North Carolina, 3, and Virginia, 3. However, the percentage of dogs tested for rabies that were positive, 0.3%, did not change compared to the mean percentage for the previous 5 years. That's the thing with most viral infections. They usually become latent, lying dormant in your body until you become severely immunocompromised and your defenses are lowered. Then boom, viral infection. And after that point, there isn't much you can do other than symptomatic treatment. Because unlike bacteria, there are no drugs that can truly kill a virus. Welcome to the irony of epidemiology. The more fatal something is, the harder it is to spread because everyone who could pass it on is already dead. Also, the symptoms are so unique. Even with absolutely no medical resources, you could diagnose rabies and quickly isolate the infected. Admittedly, in the past, sometimes that just meant killing anyone bitten by something rabid, but it worked. Add to that rabies requires direct contact, saliva to blood, and it's not airborne. Drastically lowers the number of people that can be infected as well. Everything of rabies makes it perfect for preventing widespread transmission, and that's the single most important part of reducing total numbers of deaths. Pandemics are caused by low fatality, highly infectious diseases, typically with mild symptoms that can easily be mistaken for other diseases. Even if the fatality rate goes down, if it's more infectious, then there will be a higher number of deaths, hence our relative safety from the threat of rabies. Remarkably, G survived. She recovered most of her cognitive functions within a few months, and other skills within a year, Willoughby says. She got her driver's license and is now a sophomore at Marian University in Fond du Lac, where she is majoring in biology. There are lingering signs of her illness. Geez, once an avid athlete, says she now lists to one side when she runs and walks, and no longer plays volleyball, basketball, and softball as she once did. She also speaks more slowly and sometimes not as clearly as before her illness. But Willoughby says these effects may fade over time. Geese is pretty much normal, says Willoughby, an associate professor of pediatrics at the Medical College of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. She continues to get better, counter to conventional medical thinking. I love Milwaukee, points. Best wings ever. Also Coach Barr. Aussie girl traveling the U.S. solo in 2016. Stopped in Milwaukee to mourn the Pulse Orlando massacre with your mayor who proposed gun control. People put their rainbows up and brought their dogs and animals for people to pet for therapy. I love your city. I asked the bus driver where to go for good beer vibes, and he drove me to Coaches in the bus. None of the other passengers were put out. They just wanted to talk to me about Steve Irwin. I love your city. You had no backpackers accommodation, so I stayed at the Skeevy Airport Inn. The pool was full of broken furniture and cholera. Love Wisconsin much. I stayed for 3 weeks, riding the bus and poking around. I ate your weird delicious cheese and loved your Wisconsin only beer with the cow on it. Went to a fireworks display on your lake and ran with your hash house harriers who brought their own jumpy castle. Went to all your zoos and climbed all your high ropes. Got stuck out in Green Bay Zoo. No transport, no Uber, and hitched a ride back into town with a news reporter doing a follow-up after covering the tragic deaths of river otters earlier in June. 2 lived. Feel-good story. Went to Ned Kelly's bar to celebrate, where the young barmaid told me it was named after 2 Aussie explorers called Ned and Kelly who discovered Australia. I did not disabuse her of this notion. In fact, I agreed and gave her more facts about those intrepid fellas. I keep remembering more awesome stuff. Now, I want to come back again. Rock on, Wisconsin, I love you.